Lee Harvey Oswald's story is strange to say the least. As Senator Richard Schweiker, a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, once said, "Everywhere you look with Oswald, there are fingerprints of intelligence. And when you dig deeper, it's hard not to wonder if Oswald's life was less about coincidence and more about careful design." At 17, he joined the Marines, learned Russian, and became obsessed with Marxism. Afterward, he trained as a radar operator and was eventually stationed at the Atsuki Naval Air Base near Tokyo. But you see, Atsuki wasn't just any typical base. It was a critical hub for espionage, with CIA and military intelligence always moving in and out. But what really stands out about Oswald's time in Japan is his frequent visit to a nightclub in Tokyo called the Queen Bee. It was a well-known hangout for military officers and intelligence agents, including those from CIA and FOI, Field Operations Intelligence. For a Marine private earning very little, Oswald just couldn't afford going there. It was simply too expensive, and yet he was there. Often. Who was paying for that? Some believe this is where Oswald was first approached and then recruited by the agency. In late 1958, just before Christmas, he returned home to spend a monthly with his mother, after which he joined Marine Air Control Squadron No. 9 in California. His fellow Marines there gave him the nickname Comrade Oswaldkovich as a joke because he often talked about Karl Marx and praised communist idea. But one Marine, David Bucknell, who served alongside Oswald, mentioned something far more interesting. He recalled that Oswald told him about his upcoming discharge and his plan to move to Russia for a mission with American intelligence. Now, this is where things get very interesting because Oswald indeed requested a discharge from the Marines in 1959, claiming that he needed to take care of his mother. However, instead of going to her on the very same day he was discharged, he applied for a passport. By October 1959, Oswald had traveled to Europe and made his way to, you've guessed it, Russia. Things are about to go from interesting to strange real quick. Oswald moved to the Soviet Union on a tourist visa in October 1959. He goes to the US Embassy in Moscow. He tells them that he's done with America, renounces American citizenship, and said that he intended to share a secret with the Soviet while asking to become a Soviet citizen. Now, this is crazy. Or is it? A former CIA official named Victor Marchetti wrote a well-known book in the 1970s called The CIA and the Cult of Intelligence. This book revealed many secrets the agency didn't want public. It's known as the first book that the US government tried to stop from being published. In an interview, Marchetti talked about a highly secretive program in North Carolina that only a few key senior officials within the intelligence community knew about. This program focused on making young troubled men seem like they were unhappy with America and had become fans of communism. Marchetti claimed that in 1959, when the US was having a hard time getting information from the Soviet Union, they started this program with about 40 young men. The agency wanted these young men to appear as real communist supporters, to use them in secret operations in Russia and east of Europe, hoping that the KGB, which was the Russian equivalent of CIA, would take the bait and try to convert them to be spies, making them double agent. Now, why did I mention this? Well, because a man named Tosh Plumlee, who worked for the US Army and military intelligence during the 1950s and then transitioned in the 60s as a CIA operative, said that he was part of that program in North Carolina. And that's where he met for the first time a young man his age named Lee Harvey Oswald. So Oswald is in Moscow. The KGB didn't trust him one bit. They thought he was an American spy. Things are not exactly going his way. The Soviets tell him his visa is running out, and citizenship, forget it, he's not getting it. Desperate, Oswald tried to take his own life and failed. However, just like that, the Soviets changed their minds, decided to let him stay. But why? What caused the sudden change of heart? Well, if you fast forward a few months after that incident, something very interesting happened. For the first time, one of the untouchable, highly classified U-2 spy plane, the same type Oswald used to track as a radar operator back in Japan, gets shot down for the very first time by the Soviets. Coincidence? Maybe. So the Soviets let him stay. However, they move him from Moscow to Minsk, far away from the action. There, Oswald meets Marina, a young woman whose uncle happened to be a Soviet intelligence officer. 6 weeks later, they were married. But by 1962, Oswald was bored with Russia. He wanted to come home. Now, let me break this down to you. A defector who renounced his citizenship, bragged about leaking US secret, married into Soviet intelligence family, wants to return to the US. And this is during the peak of the Cold War. You would think that the US wouldn't be too happy about someone hanging out with their biggest enemy, right? Well, not in this case. Oswald reaches out to the US Embassy and get this. Within just 48 hours, they gave him a brand new passport. And not only that, they even gave him the travel money to get back home. But here's the kicker. Oswald doesn't come back alone. He brings his daughter and his wife, the niece of a Soviet intelligence officer. Imagine if Snowden tried to do that today. Oswald is back to the US with no problem. However, on June 26, 1962, 13 days after he returned, the FBI called him in for an interview. They want an answer about his time in the Soviet Union, but none of his answers made sense to them. At one critical moment during the interview, one of the FBI agents looked him dead in the eye and said, "Were you ever an agent of the federal government or CIA?" Oswald replied, "Well, don't you know?" And then laughed, leaving the agent puzzled. He was toying with them. Afterward, the agent described Oswald's attitude during the interview as aggressive and arrogant. None of this made sense. Or did it? In 1976, a former CIA officer named James Wilcott testified before Congress. He was stationed in Tokyo during Oswald's time there. Wilcott worked in the finance department, handling payment to secret agents, all listed under code name. He testified under oath to the House Select Committee on Assassination, claiming that he knew that Oswald was a CIA-paid agent. According to him, he had released funds that was known as the Oswald Project, suggesting that Oswald was sent to the Soviet Union as a fake defector. You might be asking yourself, how come you've never heard about that story? Well, first CIA denied it, and the media, of course, tried to brush it off. They twisted his words, saying that it didn't make sense and that James Wilcott was nothing but a support staff, and the story faded. But I think something you should know about the media is that during the Church Committee hearing in 1975, which investigated abuses by CIA, FBI, and NSA, something interesting came to light. Former CIA Director William Comey admitted that the CIA had taken over part of the media. They had a network of journalists, media outlets they could rely on to control narrative, influence public opinion, and suppress certain stories. The operation was known as Operation Mockingbird and began in the late 1940s and continued through the 70s. But of course, CIA stopped doing this after they were busted, right? Oswald returned into the US didn't mark the end of his strange connection with intelligence. In fact, it was just the beginning.